What up, Marsh Pod? What a phenomenal 48 hours of basketball in the universe. Not even SimWorld hoops. While we got treated to a dandy of 3 games yesterday. Also, just a incredible 48 hours. I'm gonna get very quickly to where we're at with SimWorld hoops. We're doing basically a final third reset today, but first, I'd be remiss if I did not talk about the Warriors. You know, I don't normally go talking about NBA too much on this podcast. We're doing it, maybe sprinkling in, but I think this was a big move. I actually think this was a good move for the Warriors for multiple reasons. Jordan Poole, I think it's a really bad contract for Golden State. That's not a deal that makes now, after what he did in the playoffs, a ton of sense moving forward. He's owed more than $30 million starting next season. I think it's $30 million. I don't believe it's lower than that. It's 4-year, 120 something. So that's the first part of it. He's a big deal for a team that's now approaching the second apron, but to make this brief, because otherwise we could talk just this for 30 minutes, the Chris Paul signing, or the Chris Paul acquisition, I should say. A lot of people are saying this doesn't make sense. Two totally different play styles, mentalities between what the Warriors traditionally do and what Chris Paul is best at. And I would actually say that's not true, and I haven't seen this mentioned, and I'm kind of surprised. But I've seen the names mentioned, but not the play style. So the peak of the Warriors dynasty, which they were going to win championships if healthy regardless once KD arrived. But the second unit where they thrived was actually not in a high tempo. It was not in a high tempo. We're going to keep running it. We're going to do a lot of movement. We're going to get guys in spots that they can, like Curry, off-ball screens. They really didn't do that a lot. In fact, when they had Sean Livingston and Andre Iguodala through basically from 2015 through 2019, what they were doing was a lot of slow it down. We're gonna maintain this game. The biggest thing you always hear talked about is the non-Curry minutes. The Warriors survived in those peak dynasty years because they didn't really say, we're going to keep the same pace that we had when Curry was out there. They slowed things down, and they did a lot more. They didn't do necessarily traditional pick and roll. They still kind of kept the motion of the offense. But with Sean Livingston, who was a veteran, slowed it down. Andre Iguodala slowed it down, and they were able to just maintain the pace that they wanted to, which was slower. They didn't try to say, we're going to go all out. Here we go. Let's run. Let's see what happens. They just said, let's pace this. It's not going to be a sprint. And by the time Curry comes back in, hopefully the lead, if we have it, is the same, if not bigger. But at the very worst, we're not going to see this massive pace. What they did at that time was use a veteran point guard who could get to his spots on the ball and was very efficient in the mid-range. That was Sean Livingston, and that's almost exactly what Chris Paul is. And a veteran with a troubled injury past. Sounds very familiar. So I think from a Warrior standpoint, I actually really like this. From an on-court perspective, yes, you gave away Jordan Poole, but Jordan Poole he's going to do a lot of big numbers, man. He's going to put up huge numbers in Washington. It's going to look bad. Statistically, it's going to look bad between what Poole is doing and what the Warriors are doing. But I don't think there was a long-term future of Poole. I really don't. His play style was too erratic. His defense was atrocious. And if there's anything that Steve Kerr preaches and wants, it's defense and it's consistency. And Curry he's not a great defender, but he's a fine defender at the position. Jordan Poole was never that. He was never that, and he lost the ball with maddening turnovers. And unfortunately for Poole, with the Warriors infrastructure, they don't have time. I mean, Curry built himself over 5 to 6 years to become who he was, and he got those issues out of the way, but he did it in an environment that didn't need to win. Poole is going to go through those same amounts of things, but he's going to be doing it in an environment that does need to win. And that's the difference here. Also, if you look at it financially, Chris Paul is non-guaranteed for $30 million next season. Klay Thompson's 43 comes off the books after this season. The Warriors they gave up a protected first in 2030. I don't think it's been announced what the protections are and what the subsequent payout is. If it's if it's a lottery protected first, that if it doesn't convey turns into like 2 seconds, I think that's a great deal. If it's anything other than that, then, if it's like a lottery protected and it kind of like a de-escalating thing, I think that's a little more dangerous, but that's regardless of the point. You're going to have now a ton of cap flexibility moving forward to get below that second apron, which is very punitive. I expect Draymond will come back. We're recording this Friday at 11:20 a.m. There's a chance something comes out about that beforehand, although I wouldn't expect it to, because free agency doesn't begin until later in the month, so he can't go anywhere else between now and when this will drop at 3. But they have positioned themselves from a financial standpoint to be very good next season. Not this coming season, the following, in terms of flexibility, right? You'll only have, assuming Draymond signs, the big contracts of Draymond, Wiggins, and Curry in that season. And then you're going to have Chris Paul's contract. $30 million can be dealt with picks and young players for something. If they say, look, we can go out and we can get a better player, you could package Jonathan Kuminga, depending on what he does, although I remain a huge Jonathan Kuminga fan. I wouldn't advocate for dealing him, but for a star, Kuminga, Paul's contract, a couple firsts, you get yourself into a pretty good conversation. So this is a good move, I think, from the Warriors standpoint, even though it doesn't want to be positioned necessarily by all like that. If they think it's confusing, I actually don't think it is at all. All right, enough of that. SimWorld Hoops. Because of that elongated intro, I'm going to break this thing up into 2, and we don't have any games over the weekend, so we can do that. We're going to break this up. We're doing a final third reset. We're going to look at the Legend Conference, and we're doing the Legacy Conference. Here's what we're not doing. We are not looking at the bottom from 7 seed through 14 in the Legend Conference instance. We are looking at the top teams. And why are we doing that? Because there is going to be so much that changes. Maybe we'll do a deep dive for Wednesday's pod because we won't be back until Tuesday of next week. But in short, it is so unpredictable. It is so convoluted. It's so hard to say. Philadelphia, they're only 2 games back with 9 to play. They could get there. Yes, they could, but they have to go through 6 teams to do that. It's just so much chaos, okay? We can dive into that at a later date when there's a little bit more clarity, but I expect this to be chaos until the last week of the season. So what we are going to do, though, is look at the top. There's still chaos to be had, but it's a little bit more controlled, and we kind of know what we're going to get. So starting again, we're going to Legacy Conference. I apologize, not the Legend Conference first. So Legacy Conference. Working through the top 6 teams. No particular order, but Gotham 5. They are now the 3 seed. They beat Beast of the East last night. They move half a game ahead of them. They've won 7 straight. It's the longest win streak in SimWorld Hoops. And they are so big. When opposing teams can't match up with them, they dominate. And that's what they did against Beast of the East. When Levin Cutler was not on the floor, Gotham 5 feasted. Levin Cutler finished in a game that they lost by 8. I think he finished plus 8 or 9. He was plus 9 late in the game when they were down 5. So that might have changed a little bit. But when he was on the floor, Beast of the East was the better team. It's why they led by 12 after the first quarter. It's why they led by 14 midway through the second. But when he was out, and Cutler really isn't a great offense. He's a good offensive player, but he's not like a Tyson Simpson type of offensive big. But when he was out there, everything was better. They were more disruptive on defense. Aaron Lovejoy, Mackenzie Mbako, Mugen Williams couldn't get to their spots inside. The paint wasn't wide open. And that's what happens when you only have 2 guys that are taller than 6'4", and for whatever reason, they share the court for the entire time. This question has been asked before. I don't know when we're ever going to get an answer. When is somebody just going to play 32 minutes? When is somebody just going to say, screw this, this is our best player, he's playing the entire game? It's 32 minutes of basketball. Why not? Just bite the bullet, play the entire 8 minutes of every quarter. Let them rest during timeouts, halftime, in between quarters. But that's not what happened. And I think that's probably what Beast of these need. Fareed Redmond's their best scorer, but Levin Cutler's their most impactful player. That's Beast of these. Let's do it. We're going to jump into them. Beast of these. Levin Cutler's their most impactful player. So they need to find a way to just be more impactful and I don't want to say educated, but he has to play more than they did, because when he doesn't, that's when BC struggles. Back to Gotham 5, there's not a lot they need to figure out. They are bigger than everybody, and it's going to be matchup dependent. If they go up, though, against a really great guard, that's where I think they have their challenges. And that's kind of what you saw in the Beast of the East game. When they were matched up and they didn't have a size advantage, Gotham 5 wasn't. They were break even, if not a little bit worse. When they had that size advantage, they were able to dominate. So to me, you get the wrong matchup, and we'll get to them next with the Originators, who has a great guard and a great interior presence. That's where things get dicey for Gotham 5. Sire Matthews is a phenomenal defender. He hasn't really been a great scorer for them. Mackenzie Mbako's good, but he settles a lot for outside shots. I think he only took 3 shots that weren't threes. One of them was a mid-range jumper, and one of them was like a foot on the line, which we've seen percolate throughout the league, 2-pointer. So they don't really have a perimeter presence. They do a great job inside. They do a great job in the pick and roll, but they'll have to find a way to get on the outside. Originators, they've won 6 straight, tied with 3 teams for the second most in the league. This is what DJ Wagner has done in their last 6, some of. He's gone toe-to-toe with Lace Darius Outlaw, Bronny James, Japheth Towns, who I'm putting in this conversation just because of his, meteoric, unpredictable scoring, and then Bay Area. All of those obviously wins. And he had clutch buckets every single time. Tight game against Best Coast Ballers. He hits the game-sealing 3, the game-sealing midi, and he leads that comeback from down 10. Bay Area hits the go-ahead 3 after they go on that 10-2 run. He has a matchup coming up July 6th or 7th with Trey Turner and Southeast Select. Outside of that, over their next 4 games, they've got Gulf Coast, Queen City Kings, and AT Aliens. I'm not penciling in Southeast Select as a win. That's going to be a phenomenal game. 18-5 currently Originators for 17-6 Southeast Select. That's home court advantage, even though we're all going to be in Houston. But top seed, if you will, in the championship type preview. That's what that game is. It is a championship preview potential. But we've seen that, and that's what the Originators have, is they have that combination of an elite player at the top. The point of the spear is elite. The rest of that spear is super competent. Whether that's Vic, Snyder, Kadarius Loftus, they have a really great group. They're a dangerous team. It's why they're 18-5, and they almost feel a little comfortable up 2 games on Rocky Mountain for the top seed. Speaking of Rocky Mountain, they beat Queen City Kings. That keeps them at the 2 seed. Had they lost, they obviously would have been a half game behind Gotham 5 and into 3rd. At 6, they would have been 15-8. But at 16-7, they found their number 1 guy in Justin Bell. But I think what's going to decide if they win a championship is Lucas Banks. He was phenomenal in the game I called earlier this week. In terms of, he's a great playmaker. And very few teams have a guy in their post positioning. Now, he typically plays the 4, but he's a 3.4 assist per game guy, which means he's able to get the ball and go, get the ball and run it. That changes everything when you have a guy that can do that. LeBron James, when he wants to get up and go, that's when his teams have been so great. Now, I know he's a slow it down. We want to look at what this thing looks like, but think of Russell Westbrook, peak Russell Westbrook. Now, I'm not saying Lucas Banks is peak Russell Westbrook, but what did he do? He was able to get the ball because he was on the rebound, because he averaged triple-double there for so many seasons, and immediately start the break. That's what Lucas Banks allows them to do, and it allows Justin Bell to thrive off ball. If Rocky Mountain is going to win, Justin Bell's going to get the accolades, but Lucas Banks is going to need big days, right, where it's 10 points, 7 boards, 4 assists. That's going to switch this game completely. BCDs, you shouldn't overreact to the loss, but they need to have their bigs on the floor at all times. We said that earlier. Levin Cutler was disruptive, great blocks. He was impactful on the offensive end. He's not a scorer on his own, but that's going to be the thing to watch for BCDs as they close out. We already talked on them a little bit, so we'll move quickly to Run DMV. They're fading a little bit. Losers of their last 2, to Reigning Trays in Africa, both of which you probably thought they should have won. Reigning Trays is good. Japheth Towns had a great game. Africa, they're the 15th seed in the Legacy or the Legend Conference. That's not one that you really would like to see. And now, Best Coast Beyond the Arc is just 2 games behind them in the standings, but 3 in the loss column. They've got a big stretch coming up. They've got a matchup with 11-11 SimWorld Atlantis, who's 8. I think that's a must-win for both of them. And then they get Middle East, who is the worst team in the league. Those have to be wins because they need to refine that spark they had when they were rolling, where they haven't really had it these last couple weeks. They've got to find a way to reset themselves, because if they don't, you're looking at a very real possibility that this team stumbles into the fray that you don't want to be in, right? Where 2 games separate 8 to 14, 2.5 games separate 6 from 14. They are up by 4.5 games on Philadelphia. That is the same distance. That's 5 to 14. That's almost the same difference between 1st and 5th. Originators are up 4 games on Run DMV. These are massive stretches. They're one of 3 teams that have 10 games left on the season, along with Yacht Club and Middle East. These are huge games for Run DMV. The games coming up for the top 4 teams in the division or the conference, Originators, Rocky, Gotham, Beast, they're big. You need to win them, but your season isn't really on the line. The season's on the line for Run DMV in terms of, are you going to be in this top or are you going to be in the bottom? If they lose both of those, that's dangerous. So a huge coming up stretch for Run DMV, and I think both of those, one of them is on our first game back June 27th, next Tuesday, and then their next one is the very following day. So by midweek next week, things are going to be looking one way or another for Run DMV. I know I saw Myron Murray talking about this, media with billboard material or bulletin board material last night. This isn't bulletin board material, man. This is just fact. If you lose to these 2 teams, it's just not going to be easy to avoid that fray. You might get in. You would hope you could. But we've kind of reverted over the last 2 games to early season Run DMV and not that 11-game stretch where they were just phenomenal. So they need to refine that group. I think it's there, obviously. I think they can. But we'll find out how that goes over the next couple weeks. All right, long pod. Appreciate you tuning in. Have a great weekend. SimWorld is back, obviously. Next Tuesday, like I said, a big game there. So have a great weekend, and we will talk to you Monday morning, and we'll look at the other side of the bracket, and we'll take a look at the Legend Conference then. All right.